On this episode of A Fighter's Life, we take a look at the life and career of the baddest man on the planet, Iron Mike Tyson. Michael Gerard Tyson was born on June 30th, 1966. When Michael was 2 years old, his father abandoned the family, leaving their mother to care for Michael and his older brother and sister. When Tyson reached the age of 10 and his family struggling financially, they ended up moving to Brownsville, Brooklyn, a neighbourhood known for its high crime rate. He lived in and around neighbourhoods with a high rate of crime throughout his childhood. A young Mike Tyson growing up in his rough neighbourhoods was often a victim of bullying, fighting those who ridiculed his high-pitched voice and lisp. During this time, Mike began developing his own street fighting style. This led him down a path which ultimately transitioned him into criminal activity. Tyson then joined a gang known as the Jolly Stompers. These gang members would rob shops at gunpoint while the 11-year-old Tyson was ordered to take money from the cash registers. Mike was constantly getting in trouble with the law, and by the age of 13 he had been arrested 38 times. Due to these altercations with the police, Tyson ended up getting sent to a reform school in upstate New York called Tryon School for Boys. Here Tyson met counsellor Bob Stewart, who had been an amateur boxing champion. Tyson wanted Stewart to teach him how to box. Stewart agreed to teach Tyson on the condition that he would stay out of trouble and work harder in school. With the promise made, Tyson began to progress in school and became determined to learn everything he could about boxing. Tyson excelled, and in 1980, with Stewart feeling he had taught him everything he knew, introduced him to legendary boxing manager Cus D'Amato. Immediately he recognised Tyson's promise as a contender, telling him, if you want to stay here and you want to listen, you could become the world heavyweight champion someday. The relationship between D'Amato and Tyson was more than just a relationship between boxer and his trainer. It was one of a father and son. D'Amato entered Tyson into amateur boxing matches and non-sanctioned fights to teach the teen how to deal with older opponents. Kevin Rooney also trained Tyson and was occasionally assisted by Teddy Atlas, although Atlas was dismissed by D'Amato when Tyson was 15, with Rooney eventually taking over all training duties for the young fighter. As an amateur, Tyson won gold medals at the 1981 and 1982 Junior Olympic Games, defeating Joe Cortez in 1981 and beating Kelton Brown in 1982. In the same year, Tyson's mother died of cancer. This in turn would see Cus D'Amato take in the 16-year-old Tyson and become his legal guardian. Around the same time, Tyson was expelled from Catskill High for his erratic and often violent behaviour. Tyson continued his schooling through private tutors. In 1984, Tyson won the gold medal at the National Golden Gloves held in New York, beating Jonathan Littles, but lost to Tillman during the Olympic trials, who went on to become a gold medalist. After failing to make the Olympic team, D'Amato decided it was time for his fighter to turn professional. Tyson made his professional debut at 18 on March 6, 1985 against Hector Mercedes, a knockout win in round 1 for Iron Mike. The rest of the year was a successful one, with Tyson and his win streak attracting media attention, and Tyson was billed as the next great heavyweight champion. Then on November 4th, 1985, in what was a crushing blow to Mike, his trainer and surrogate father, Cus D'Amato, died of pneumonia. Kevin Rooney then took over for D'Amato, and less than 2 weeks later, Tyson continued his climb up the heavyweight rankings. He recorded his 12th straight knockout win against Eddie Richardson in Houston, Texas, dedicating the fight to his late trainer. Tyson's first nationally televised bout, carried by ABC Sports, took place on February 16, 1986 against journeyman heavyweight Jesse Ferguson. Tyson knocked down Ferguson with an uppercut in the 5th round and broke his nose. During the 6th round, Ferguson began to clinch and hold Tyson in an apparent attempt to avoid further punishment. After the referee constantly signalling to Ferguson to obey his commands over and over, the referee finally stopped the fight. The fight was initially ruled a win for Tyson by disqualification. The ruling was adjusted to a win by TKO after Tyson's corner protested that the DQ win would end Tyson's string of knockout victories. In July 86, after recording 6 more knockout victories, Tyson fought former world title challenger Marvis Frazier. Tyson won the fight with a vicious uppercut that knocked Frazier unconscious 30 seconds into the fight. On November 22, 1986, Tyson challenged Trevor Burbeck for the WBC Heavyweight Championship. Tyson finished Burbeck with a TKO in the 2nd round to become boxing's youngest world heavyweight champion. In 1987, Mike Tyson added the WBA and IBF titles to his collection after defeating James Smith by unanimous decision and Tony Tucker also by unanimous decision 2 fights later. He became the first heavyweight champion in history to own all 3 major belts, the WBA, WBC and IBF world titles. Tyson intimidated fighters with his strength combined with his outstanding hand speed, accuracy, coordination and timing. Tyson also possessed notable defensive abilities, holding his hands high in the peekaboo stance taught by his mentor for Augusto D'Amato. Tyson's explosive punching technique was due in large part to crouching immediately before throwing a hook or an uppercut. This allowed the spring in his legs to add power to the punch, which he perfected to devastating effect. Tyson had 3 fights in 1988, one of which was Larry Holmes by knockout in the 4th round. This knockout defeat was the only knockout loss Holmes had suffered in all of his 75 professional bouts. On June 27, 1988, Tyson faced Michael Spinks. At the time, the bout was the richest fight in history and expectations were very high. Boxing pundits were predicting a titanic battle of styles, with Tyson's aggressive infighting conflicting with Spinks' skillful outboxing and footwork. The fight ended after 91 seconds when Tyson knocked Spinks out in the first round, many considering this to be the pinnacle of Tyson's fame and boxing ability. Mike Tyson recorded 2 more back-to-back TKO victories, one of them being Britain's Frank Bruno stopping the fighter in the 5th round. But then Tyson's win streak finally came to an end on February 11th, 1990. He lost his championship belt to Buster Douglas in Tokyo, Japan. Tyson was the clear favourite, sent Douglas to the mat in the 8th round, but Douglas came back in the 10th, knocking Tyson out for the first time in his career. Tyson recovered from the loss by knocking out Olympic gold medalist and former amateur boxing rival Henry Tillman later that year. In July 1991, Tyson was accused of sexual assault by Desiree Washington. Tyson was ordered to serve 6 years in prison. On March 25, 1995, after serving 3 years of his sentence, Tyson was released from prison and readied himself for a comeback to boxing. Tyson arranged his next fight with Peter McNeely in Las Vegas, Nevada on August 19, 1995. Tyson won the fight, knocking out McNeely in just 89 seconds. After a successful comeback, Tyson won the WBC heavyweight strap, once again defeating Frank Bruno by TKO, this time in the 3rd round. Then after defending the title against Bruce Seldon on November 9th, 1996, Tyson would come head-to-head with his next biggest challenger, Evander Holyfield. Holyfield won the contest in the 11th round, becoming only the 2nd person to win the heavyweight championship 3 times. Tyson claimed he was a victim of multiple illegal headbutts by Holyfield and vowed to avenge the loss. On June 28, 1997, the 2 boxers faced off yet again, live on pay-per-view, setting the record at the time for the highest number of paid television viewers. Both boxers also received record purses for the match, making them at the time the highest paid professional boxers in history. The fight took an unexpected turn in the 3rd when Tyson was disqualified for grabbing Holyfield and biting a chunk out of the fighter's right ear. Due to the incident, on July 9, 1997, the Nevada State Athletic Commission revoked Tyson's boxing license and fined the boxer $3 million. In January 1999, Tyson returned to the ring against the South African Vonsoir Botha. While Botha initially controlled the fight, Tyson allegedly attempted to break the boxer's arms during a tie-up. During the ill-tempered bout, both boxers were cautioned by the referee. Botha was ahead on all the scorecards. Nonetheless, in the 5th round, Tyson landed a straight right hand that ended the contest by knockout. On February 5, 1999, Tyson ran into more legal problems. He was sentenced to a year in prison and fined $5,000 for assaulting 2 motorists after a traffic accident on August 31, 1998. After serving 9 months in prison, in his comeback fight on October 23, 1999, he fought Orlin Norris, which ended in a no contest after Norris suffered a knee injury suffered from a knockdown caused from a left hook thrown after the bell sounded in the 1st round. Tyson fought 3 more times in 2000, winning all 3, but the win against Andrew Golota was later ruled as a no contest after Mike failed a medical testing positive for cannabis. After beating Brian Nielsen in his sole fight in 2001, Mike Tyson's next highly publicised fight would be in 2002 with WBC, IBF and IBO champion Lennox Lewis. At the press conference, the 2 boxers began to brawl. This in turn threatened the event and the possible cancellation of the bout, but the fight was eventually scheduled for June of that year. Lewis dominated the fight and knocked out Tyson with a right hand in the 8th round. Tyson was respectful after the fight and praised Lewis on his victory. The fight was the highest grossing event in pay-per-view history at the time, generating $106.9 million from 1.95 million buyers in the US. In 2003, 8 months after his loss to Lennox Lewis, Tyson beat Clifford Etienne in 49 seconds in round 1. Then in the last 2 fights of his professional boxing career, Mike Tyson suffered back-to-back losses. One to Danny Williams in 2004, then journeyman Kevin McBride in 2005, stunning the boxing world by quitting on his stool at the end of the 6th round. On May 12, 2020, after 15 years out of the ring, Tyson had the boxing world buzzing and intrigued after he posted a video on his Instagram of him training again. At the end of the video, Tyson hinted at a return to boxing by saying, "I'm back." Shortly after, it was announced that Mike Tyson would go up against Roy Jones Jr. in an 8-round boxing exhibition. The event was successful, with both fighters hearing the final bell and the fight being scored a draw despite Tyson appearing to dominate his younger opponent. There are rumours of Iron Mike Tyson lacing up the gloves once again for another exhibition. Whether this happens, only time will tell. I guess we'll have to wait and see. If you like videos like this, please like and subscribe and press that notification bell to keep up to date with the latest episodes of A Fighter's Life.